Hello, AP Biology students. We're going to go over the 12th section in Unit 3. And in this section, we're going to talk about something called photorespiration. We just got done talking about the processes of the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. And this is basically where plants use light, water, and CO2 to make sugar and oxygen. Remember that plants are going to use the stomata on the underside of leaves for gas exchange. They're going to allow oxygen out and then CO2 in. However, if you also remember, water leaves these stomata as well, so what they do is they close them during hot portions of the day to conserve water. This is going to cause an issue because CO2 levels are going to drop and oxygen levels are going to rise. This is because CO2 is going to continuously be used up, but there's not going to be a replenishment of the CO2 because the stomata are closed. Oxygen levels are also going to rise since they can't escape since the stomata are closed. So this causes the problem of photorespiration, where instead of rubisco taking up CO2, it's going to take up oxygen. And this is not good for a plant. Instead of taking up carbon dioxide and fixing it into molecules that will eventually become glucose, these molecules will now start actually breaking off CO2. Here's a chart where you can see photorespiration. Rubisco normally takes in CO2 and produces G3P for the Calvin cycle, but when CO2 levels are low, it's going to take in oxygen over carbon dioxide. And in this, you can see that the photorespiration is going to cause the plant to lose CO2 instead of gain CO2. Here's another way of looking at it. You can see the normal Calvin cycle where we're intaking CO2, producing G3P, which then makes glucose. If you take a look at photorespiration, you can see it's intaking oxygen, which then will produce CO2. And again, that's not a good thing for a plant because instead of taking in carbon dioxide, it's going to lose carbon dioxide. Now, why does this happen? Why do plants intake oxygen as well as CO2 when using rubisco? The answer is basically evolution. When plants were evolving photosynthesis, oxygen levels were low, so rubisco didn't have to be selective for CO2 or oxygen. So at that time period, since oxygen levels were so low, it didn't hurt the plant to be able for rubisco to bind carbon dioxide and oxygen. Now that our atmosphere has a lot more oxygen, this is a major problem for plants. I like to relate this back to, again, when photosynthesis was first evolving. It was about 3.5 billion years ago. The atmosphere had a lot of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane. The cyanobacteria around 3 billion years ago started involving this photosynthetic process, and this was a huge evolutionary advantage because they could produce sugar and then the byproduct of oxygen. About 2.5 billion years ago, there was a huge increase in oxygen, and then all anaerobic life nearly died off in this event called the Great Oxidation Catastrophe, or the Great Oxidation Event. What happened was CO2 levels drastically decreased, which is a greenhouse gas, and then the Earth got very cold because CO2 levels went down. And this ice age lasted for nearly 300 million years. I think they also call it the snow-capped Earth time period. About 2 billion years ago, our ozone started to form, and then the planet started to warm. Now, this ozone layer protects us from the harmful UV radiation from the sun. It was around this period where aerobic species started to really dominate the Earth. And by aerobic, I mean species that use oxygen for some type of metabolic process. Oxygen actually allowed for complex life to evolve quickly after, since there was so much more oxygen in the atmosphere than before this event.